What's the word, y'all? It's Double R the God tapping in with y'all, man. This is the 10th episode of the God Pod. I'm here with a great friend that I've known for 20 plus years. I've known him since about fourth or fifth grade for me. We met at a basketball court hooping at a church, and we've been locked in ever since. This is somebody who I've looked up to musically, who introduced me into the rock world, who has not only introduced me into the rock world, but showed me how to play the drums, showed me how to play the guitar. And he's just been a great friend, somebody that I've always been able to come to and talk to about life. Aside from that, this man is in a band. He's going to talk about that. The name of his band is Dead Wrong. And he's also been building a long-standing career in the construction world, starting off as a apprentice carpenter and has worked his way up to assistant superintendent and is planning to work his way even farther to become a superintendent. So he's going to give us an understanding of the construction world for those who don't know, for those who do know, and for those who may want to get into the construction world. So we have you, Santino Aguilera.
Thank you, man. That was
sir.
a heck of an introduction, Ray. Good to see you, brother. Thanks for having me out here. I appreciate it.
No problem,
And
man.
appreciate this opportunity. You know, I've never done a podcast or nothing like that, so this is real cool.
No, that's what's up, bro. I'm glad you're here, man. How you feeling today?
I'm good.
That's what's up.
Everything's going well.
So I'm going to ask you a question that as long as we've known each other, I've never really got to ask you. How did you get into music? Like, how did you get into guitar? I know you're a drummer, but you started off playing the guitar. What was your first introduction to that?
It really started off when I was young, and my parents tell me all the time that the guitar player Carlos Santana, a lot of people know him. You know, he's been around for a really long time, played Woodstock. You know, I used to watch Santana, the specific live video that he did in Mexico. I used to watch that all the time as a kid growing up. And they told me that I would grab my toy guitar at 3 years old, standing in front of the TV and just watching that. So I think that something about his music as a child growing up, that just hit me right away. And I always had a drive to want to be like that. My parents would tell me that I would mimic his movements watching a TV. Like, you know, as a little kid, there'd be cartoons and then the Santana video. You know, that's what I did and watch. And I watched that video, you know, countless times from being that young. I think that was probably my first exposure and interest because my parents aren't musicians. You know, they both listen to and appreciate music, but something about hearing that so young, hearing the way that he played and the way that he, you know, like for me, Carlos Santana doesn't just play guitar. You know, he plays that soul, and it's a totally different thing. So I think that it's just something about the way that he did it and that video and the chemistry that you can see them playing live on stage. Something about that just sparked my interest from a very young age, and then it just kind of developed from there, knowing other people and talking to other people. But that's kind of how.
So when did you pick up your first guitar?
My parents would say 3 years old because I had my little toy one, and then like when I was 5, they got a picture of me picking up my grandpa's actual guitar, you know, and just running around with it. But I'd say I started playing really when I was like 8, 9 years old, trying to learn, you know.
And did you start off with the acoustic guitar or electric guitar?
Acoustic guitar. I always tried to play that, you know, that classical, Latin-inspired classical guitar.
Yeah, I remember you had the 8-string guitar.
Yep.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm getting back into that. My girlfriend's son, I just started putting him into lessons, and since I got him back into guitar lessons, I picked up the guitar myself. As you know, I put it down for a number of years because the sole focus was the drums. But yeah, I'm playing a little more now.
So how did you transition what was the transition from the guitar to the drums?
I played guitar forever, man. You know, like I said, probably from when I was 8 years old to mid-20s, seriously. But when I was 18, no, when I was like 16, I got in a high school band. And my friend, Jason Rafter, something about the way that he played the drums made me want to learn that. I never really thought about that before. I was guitar all the way, you know, but something about watching him play made me want to do that. And I asked him to teach me, and then He, showed me a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and I bought my first drum set like within that year and started teaching myself with the help of him and the help of, at that time YouTube was pretty much just coming out, early 2000s. Um, so I started teaching myself how to play.
How big was your first drum set? Like how many pieces was it?
The drum set that I play now was my first drum set. I never changed.
Mm.
I got lucky and I found a very high quality drum set for a good price. So same one, but pieces. I got a kick, snare, and three toms, and then after that, you just buy your cymbals. So they call it a 5 piece.
Mm. What do you feel like is the biggest challenge musically from switching to guitar to drums?
The fact that you go from thinking about two things to four things, you got to split your brain that way. It's a totally different, guitar. You do a different thing with this hand and a different thing with this hand. Playing drums, you got to do something different with all four
Right.
feet, especially metal drumming and stuff like that. The patterns are a little bit more irregular. So it was a different learning process for sure. And actually, when I started learning, my buddy had me do only feet first. He showed me a song, feet first. And after I nailed the feet on that, he was like, okay, now I'm going to show you the hands and then put it together. And learning that way kind of helped me out, I think.
No, definitely. Yeah. Cause when I've been playing piano for some time now, and everybody says piano is a really hard instrument to learn, which I can agree it is difficult. I don't get to see that entirely because I started off playing piano, but with the instruments that I have learned to play, playing the drums is probably one of the most difficult because to me, I feel like drumming is more closer to dancing than playing any other instrument because you're using your entire body. And just the fact that you kind of get to like for example, with guitar or piano, you have to learn songs. With drumming, it's more like you get to play the songs early on and doing those type of things.
Right.
Um, so what would you say is the difference, being that you're in a band? How would you compare the roles of being a drummer and a guitar in the band?
Um, well, the drums are like the heart, the heartbeat of the song, not the heart of the song, but the heartbeat, because everything has to go from the drums. If the drums are too fast, everybody else has to kind of speed up in order to match that speed. If the drummer slows down a little bit, same thing. Everybody's got to stay in tune with that. If you lose the guitar, like something happens with an amp or whatever, that drummer still got to keep playing. He keeps the song going until that guitar amp problem is fixed, and then you just keep on going because you can't just stop mid song when you're on stage. That just doesn't translate well. It'd be better to have something go incorrectly than something just completely stop right off rip. So I guess that's the difference. The drums, they got to keep going the entire time, and if they're off, then the rest of the band's going to be off. But the guitar player can, kind of do whatever he has to do, and it doesn't affect the whole band the same way.
What would you say are the key things that makes a drummer stand out? Like, what are the elements that make a drummer better than the rest?
I wouldn't say anybody's better than the rest. Um, the elements that make it stand out really depend on the type of music. Metal is heavy drum driven. You almost hear the drums first because of it wants you to feel that power and feel that emotion. So you get the hard double bass or the very fast drum beats, and that's kind of what draws you to rock and metal music, in my opinion. Other music, you know, like pop music and country music, they're very heavily guitar based, and the drums are kind of quieted down and in the background, keeping the beat but quieted down. It really depends on the type of music that chooses the instrument as a forefront, not just drums and guitar, but piano. The vocals. Heavily. Some people cannot listen to a song if it's just instrumentals. They got to have the voice there. And it just depends on the type of person, what you're listening to, because there's a lot of rock and metal music, as I've shown you, that don't have no vocals.
Yeah.
But that's because you are listening to what those people are doing, and it's a little bit out of the ordinary. That speaks for itself. It's not just a regular, 1, 2, 3, 4 beat.
Right,
It's a little
right.
bit more than that, you know.
What would you say are the most difficult genres of music to play in regards to the drums?
Um, I would say, you know, speed metal is hard to play because you got to be fast, and more than just fast, you got to be accurate, but also progressive and Latin type stuff is a little bit different because you start to learn different polyrhythms and different, out of the ordinary beats, out of the ordinary progressions that you have to maintain in order to keep everything going. So I would say probably, a lot of metal music and a lot of just like out of the ordinary listening.
Now, for those who don't know what polyrhythm is, explain that for them.
So that kind of goes into a whole music theory talk, right? But to make it plain and simple, generally everything is based off of a 4/4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. A polyrhythm is going like a 5/4. So you do 5 beats up top, you do 4 beats or 4 beats on bottom. You know, so you have to do 5 hits at the time that your feet does 4 hits.
Like basically being in two different time signatures almost.
Yes, exactly.
Now, how would you explain like how would you describe your style of playing? Because you have certain drummers that focus on the hi hats more, that focus on the toms more, or like how would you describe your style?
Um, I describe it as like my real style is kind of like a fusion metal mix, because I'm very heavily influenced on a lot of Latin based music. Even more, now I listen to Santana songs and I play the drums to them. That's something I never did before. And that type of drumming is way different than doing hardcore or doing metal. I may be more used to doing hardcore now because I do it more often with the band and stuff like that. But when I do my own thing, it's a little bit more complex than being straightforward. There's a lot more movement around the kit instead of being heavily focused on doing one thing or heavily focused on, double bass drumming, something like that.
Now, being in a band, how important is the chemistry of the members and in relation as well as in relation to the performance?
You definitely have to like each other. And I'm fortunate in that because the band that I'm with, I actually went to high school with all those guys. And the band didn't happen until, age 30. But I went to high school with them all, and you got to like each other because if something comes up that you disagree on, you can disagree on it, talk about it, and then move forward. If you don't like the dude already at
Right.
rip that you're trying to work with, and he's saying something and he's not, you know, vibing at all with what you're trying to say, and there's just an argument there, then the two of you aren't gonna pass that off to keep it forward. You're just gonna be like, "See ya." You know what I mean? So
Right.
you kind of have to have a good bond between the people that you're with.
Now, what is your creative music process like? Like, are you starting off on the drums? Are you writing the drums first? Is the guitar player writing the guitar? And then also explain like how many members is your band composed of?
So right now, Dead Wrong is a 4 piece. We were a 5 piece at one point, and I'm not the original drummer of Dead Wrong either. Dead Wrong was a band from around 2013, and they had a different drummer who ended up passing away, and then they stopped um, doing the music thing for a long time. And then it was just that the vocalist really wanted to get back on. He and I ran into each other at a show, and like I said, we all went to high school together. So our friend was like, "Yeah, he plays drums. Let's do this." And then kind of started out that way. And at that time, it was a 5 piece, but we lost a member, and right now we're at a 4 piece. Just different um, priorities that had to go through, and we understand we're in great standings with him, but he was just a little bit too busy with the home and the kids, to be putting forth what we needed at the time.
As a drummer, who is it easier for you to write off of? Like, is it the bass guitar, the vocalist, or the guitar player?
That really depends on the person. I have played with a lot of different people over the years, just jamming, and it really depends on who's taking that that forward step. There's some guys who, when they play the guitar, they're writing what's going on, and you are about to follow that. So I've been that way with a few different guitar player friends of mine, and they just start going, and I follow right after them. There's other people that I know that I kind of have to take the lead sometimes, and so I just start doing something, and I know that they're going to come in with me. So it all depends on the individual that way.
So typically with your band, is it more so somebody's already has something written most of the time, or is it we're all getting together, let's just kind of vibe out and see where it goes, or like what's the creative process?
Sometimes when you're really trying to sit down and write something, too many voices at that time becomes difficult. So a lot of the times it'll be me and one other person that start the scratch and then pass it to everybody else, and then it's added into. All of us are very skilled musicians. So when something comes to surface, like a riff or a beat, something that goes along, we pass it around, and then our bass player Arthur, he puts his spin on it. Our guitar player Eric, he puts his spin on it, and Terry, our vocalist, actually plays guitar, and he wrote a lot of Dead Wrong's music. So between him and Eric, it's our creative process is very open. It's just sometimes we get together, just the two of us, and write something out. Arthur's written beats, Terry's written beats, and I just kind of do the drums to it all. So
What's one of the craziest things that's happened at your performance, or like one of the most unexpected things?
I don't know if we'd call it unexpected because of the type of environment that we're at. We're hardcore, so it's a little bit more aggressive than most people would be comfortable with. A lot of people don't go to hardcore shows because it's a uncomfortable environment. I mean,
It can be dangerous.
Yeah. Uh, while we're playing, is that the question or craziest thing I've seen? 'Cause that's
We'll
a
do
different
both.
question.
One first when you've been performing.
When we were performing, I think the craziest thing is the whole bar just kind of exploded in a huge mosh pit, and then the next thing you know, there's somebody doing cartwheels, and right behind him, there's a person with a bar, just grabbed a bar stool and started swinging the bar stool. But that's the type of fun that people have at those shows, which may not be fun for other people. Some people are, they hear that and they're like, "What are you talking about? Like that's what you do on the weekends,
Right.
But it's a different type of environment, a different kind of emotion that comes out of that type of music.
Now, what about like just at shows you've been at?
Uh, I mean, there's a lot going over the years, but one of the most memorable was two people picking up a whole couch that was in the back of the venue, like this, and just throwing it up in the middle of everybody dancing. And
Yeah,
getting
that's
down
wild.
And stuff like that. Like
That is wild.
You don't really go to a concert, right, watching music if that's the only thing that you're doing, and then you just see a couch coming up over your head. That's a little bit out of the ordinary.
Man, that's down there like an episode of the Boondocks.
Through a chair.
You're right.
Right.
Man. So how do you prepare mentally and physically for a performance?
I think I take it the most serious. I don't want to say the most serious at everybody, but I definitely get the most nervous at everybody. Sometimes I don't talk before a show. Like I come in and everybody's like, "You all right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I got a job to do."
Right.
Because at that time, like I was mentioning earlier, I cannot mess up. I can't falter. No matter what happens on stage, if people are throwing bar stools and if, the guitar amp has a problem or whatever, I got to keep going and I got to do that song well from start to finish. So for me, it's just kind of, I get very nervous. And a lot of the times if I have to step back, I'll do my warm ups on my hands just to kind of get that process going and just, dive into being the drummer at that night.
Yeah, the performing is kind of like a high in a sense. Like even when I get on stage to rap, it's like you feeling that nervousness all up until you get on there, and then when you get on stage, it's like it just happens in a blur. Like it happens so quick, and it's like, okay, now I'm in it. I feel so much better.
Right.
But leading up to it is just like it's definitely anxiety. But now I kind of look at it as like Like they say anxiety is another word, or nervousness is another word for excitement. So that's what I'm always telling myself, like I'm getting excited before this performance.
Right. Yeah, that's a very good point. And it always goes well, but at that time it's just like I've been asked, like, hey, you all right? And I'm just like, I'm just the drummer for Dead Wrong.
Like
And
I gotta
like that
lock in
that's what
right
I
now.
gotta do.
So what's your process for like learning new songs or, adapting to new styles?
So for both guitar and drums, I taught myself. I did take piano lessons for a really quick minute as a young kid, 10 years old maybe, and guitar lessons for a minute too. But I didn't really stick with that, even though my interest was still there the whole time. So learning off of friends, teaching myself, and being able to learn songs by ear is kind of how. I've learned a lot of different artists' material, and I've learned a lot of their material. Like I can play whole albums by certain artists and things like that, and that's because I sit down, I listen to it, I can hear what they're doing on the drums, I know what they're hitting at that time, and then if I got a question, YouTube is a great resource for that because if I watch that drummer performing on stage, I'm like, oh, that's what he did right there. Or, I catch something that I didn't even hear. And I'm like, oh, he does this right here. So it's a lot of studying. And that is what I call it. Like when Dead Wrong got a hold of me, they had music I had to learn. So I just listened to that nonstop and studied it. And then me and Eric, the guitar player, got together and we're working on how to play those songs, and I picked it up just fine and I wasn't watching anybody either. I just learned it all by ear. And then meeting up with Eric, he'd be like, you know what? That was good, but instead of this, it's a little bit of this, So the help of other people and basically by ear.
Yeah, I feel like until I started getting into drumming and I got my first drum set, I didn't realize how much the drummer was doing because you hear a lot of the guitar, like what you're hearing and what you're seeing is completely different when it comes to rock. Like I remember like listening to some of your music where it's just the guitar and the drums and you just hearing the guitar shredding. You know what I'm saying? But when you look at the guitar player, sometimes they're barely moving and it's just like, but when you look at the drummer is going full send, like they're
Yeah.
constantly moving and it gives you a different perspective on what's really going on. So I feel like when playing instruments, that's a big part of learning is being able to see exactly what they're doing with their movements, especially drumming.
Yeah. I agree. There's definitely a lot going on. You got to be somewhat, physically fit to play a whole,
Definitely.
45-hour set. It's an exhausting thing to do. And sometimes other instruments aren't exactly that way.
What's one band that's had a big influence on your music, or a
On
couple of bands,
on our music, Dead Wrong.
Or just in general?
So that um that's a long question because mine and Dead Wrongs are very different. Like I said, I have a certain style that I don't incorporate into Dead Wrong stuff. That band is just it's a fast, aggressive, hardcore band, and that's what it's got to be. There's a certain template that we follow, and so for Dead Wrong, we as a whole are influenced by bands like Terror. Terror was, an early hardcore band, definitely one of the biggest ones right now. They're still making music, but they were just kind of one of the legends. Terror, Represent, same thing. They've been around for 20 years. Both of them. Expire, um, Turnstile. You know, um, those kinds of bands influence what Dead Wrong does. But me, I go all over the place. I can be drumming Latin music because I listen to Santana all my life, and one of the first metal bands I ever listened to was Iron Maiden. And Iron Maiden's drumming is very complex. It's not just standard rock. They got 7 8 minute songs
Right,
that
right,
they're not doing the same thing for
right.
seven
And
eight minutes
changes up.
either. Yeah. So and I've learned a lot of that music, so that I kind of take a lot of style from that.
Do you feel like how important do you feel like music theory is to understanding music and drumming? Because like people like us, we had lessons early on, but we strayed away and went more towards our ear. Like, how important do you think music theory is?
I think it's extremely important. Nowadays, I want to go back and like I want to learn. I don't know how to read music. I don't know how to read music, but I can still play uh, a difficult amount of. That's not the right word. A lot of difficult songs. Just because I don't know how to read music doesn't mean I can't play music well. But learning music theory and learning how to read music would make me way better than I am. That's for certain. I would say that that's kind of where you have to start in order to truly elevate to a completely different level of musician. Understanding music theory and knowing how to read music is key.
Yeah.
There's definitely people, not only myself but around the world, that have been self-taught and are amazing musicians. That's not to say, but music theory is very key. You have to have at least somewhat of an understanding of what's going on, in order to make something come out in a extraordinary fashion.
Yeah, I kind of like now that I think about it, like over my years of learning, I will almost compare it to being able to speak really well without being able to read. You know what I'm saying? Like obviously being able to the language part is the most important part of it, being able to speak, but to be able to go back and know what you're doing or to know what something is called, like for me, one of the biggest things was like learning your majors and your minors and certain chords and stuff like that and chord progressions and just being able to name what it is that I'm listening to or experiencing helps a lot.
Yeah, it definitely helps a lot because there's a lot of that I never. I don't want to say never, but I don't know, and I can't recall ever really grasping either. I think that might have been what deterred me from lessons was trying to read music because I just learned guitar by tabs. Those are easier to read.
And what are the
So
tabs?
tabs is like it's like the easy way out of reading music. There's six strings on a guitar, so a tab shows you six lines, and then it has numbers that represent where you put your fingers on the frets.
I'm
So,
familiar.
tabs was an easy way to learn guitar songs and things like that when I was younger learning, because I learned how to play a lot of songs that way by reading tabs. And that, for the drums, that's just by ear. There's drum music, but I don't know how to read music. You know what I'm saying? So I've never learned a song that way, but I can play a lot of songs 100% correctly because I can hear what's going on. And like I've said, I've watched that drummer performing that song, and I'm like, oh yeah, okay.
What would you suggest to somebody who's trying to get into a band or want to get gigs for music or trying to get performances?
Um, it's tough. It's definitely tough because that's all I wanted to do. All my 20s was be in a hardcore band. Um, and even though I played music and going to a bunch of local shows, I'd go to more local shows than anything else. Um, the people that knew me there and even knew that I was a musician there, it wasn't just like an offer that came up. And even though I tried to network and things like that, and just wasn't tight enough with those people or whatever. It's a hard thing to do because you have to network. You have to be personable, obviously, to be able to get along with individuals in order to make music. And Dead Wrong was just a happen chance for me. That vocalist at that time really wanted to get his band back together, but he needed a drummer. And the bass player that, you know, he was talking to, is a great friend of mine. So he's like, hey, I know this guy, check out his videos. What do you think? And he watched the videos and thought that I was, enough to cut it. And then we met shortly after that. It was just like, hey, do you want to do this? And it just kind of fell into my lap. So it's hard. You got to network. That's the main thing. And now social media helps out with that. But even then, I wasn't. I would just post videos for the sake of posting videos. I don't think I did that for any type of, hey, look at what I can do. You know what I mean?
What is one piece of drum equipment that you can't live without?
can't live without.
Yes.
Drum equipment that I can't live without. I guess it'd be the double bass pedal. You
Yeah, you
know,
love the double bass.
yeah, I do. Whether it be metal music or like hard metal music, hardcore, or even going back to like the old school type metal music, like Iron Maiden and stuff like that. It all uses it, even if it's just slightly. But that it's too convenient, you know, to be able to incorporate a whole nother. You're adding a whole nother portion to what you're doing. So definitely that.
Now, what advice would you give to somebody who wants to learn how to play drums or learn how to play guitar?
Um, I would definitely start with the professional lessons to try to read music and understand music theory because once you've done those two things, you can learn any instrument. You know, I think that learning the piano is very it's a route to learning music. I never did it the right way, but I think that if I didn't know the piano, I'd be better at guitar. You know, I think that starting out reading music, maybe starting out on the piano so you could branch to other things. Because even being a pianist is like it helps you be a better drummer because it's a separation. It's a different separation than playing guitar.
Definitely.
You know, um, I'd say professional lessons is the way to go there. But nowadays, you can do anything with YouTube. You know, if you have the drive and all that, you can just all right, I'm going to start this 30-day lesson trial and try
Right.
going from there. It really depends on your ability to grasp that information and, you know, start making music. Anybody who's got the want to do that is going to do that because music is a universal language. Nobody has to speak it to feel it, to understand it, you know.
So let's move into the construction world. Now, you started off as an apprentice carpenter. What are the roles of an apprentice carpenter and what is their job?
So, an apprentice carpenter is exactly what it sounds like. You're just starting out. Typically, you shadow a journeyman carpenter and you work with them to learn the trade. Um,
So, what is a carpenter?
the so I'm part of the union. The union spreads out into they get their hands on a lot of different things. So you can be a carpenter. You could do drywall. You could do cabinet work. You could do floor work. You could do heavy industrial scaffolding, heavy industrial concrete, you know, road work, even. That's all under the umbrella of the local carpenters union. And some of those things may have different pay scales, but generally they have the same pay scale. You could be making the same as a concrete carpenter outside as a drywall carpenter inside. You know, so that a carpenter is very vast when you talk about the union. People think carpenter and they think maybe cabinetry or type of the finish work, trim work, stuff like that. But that's not the case in the carpenters union. There's a lot of different things that we're so expansive, in building Detroit and building Michigan that we offer a lot of training and a lot of different things. Um, you know, the list is long there.
So, how did you first get into construction or into carpentry?
So I was kind of raised around it, um, and it just fell into what I was going to do. My dad did the same thing, the exact same thing that I'm doing now. My dad did when he was younger. He became an apprentice. He excelled to a journeyman carpenter. He went to a project superintendent, started running work, and now he's a senior superintendent because he's been doing it so long, has the knowledge, and is able to run larger scale projects due to those reasons. So that's how I did it. He, um, we were working together, like right after I graduated high school, building somebody's house, an addition to somebody's house, and he was just like, "Hey, how do you like this?" I'm like, "Ah, that's all right. You want to do it for a living? Yeah, okay." So he just kind of got the ball rolling there. And when I started, I didn't realize that I was stepping into a career. I was going for something to make a little bit more money. I was working as a busboy at the time, so I'm like, oh, well, I can make more than that, sure. And I went for my next
That's
job,
crazy.
not
I
knowing
remember
that,
that.
yeah, not knowing that my next job was going to be the rest of my life because that's exactly what happened, you know.
What are the important skills that you feel like a carpenter needs to know?
That definitely goes with, your different divisions, whether you want to be good at drywall, whether you want to be good at concrete, or whether you want to learn a little bit of it all. But at the end of the day, what you need to be successful as a carpenter is you got to have heart, because it's not, if it was easy, everybody would do it. It's not easy. It's hard work, hard on your body, hard on your mind sometimes because of the things that you have to deal with. Um, and not everybody is this way, but definitely hard on your perseverance, because you can build a job, that job's over, and then you're looking for another job. You get laid off by that company, and then you got to find more work, and then it happens again. It is a tough thing to last in. You got to want it. You have to want it 100%, because otherwise you can just go do something else for a more consistent type of work. You don't become consistent until you become really good at what you do, and established into a company. But as you're just learning, you'll be everywhere. You will do drywall, do flooring, do concrete, because at the end of those jobs, you might get laid off and then you're on to the next one trying to make money.
Right, right.
So you just have to learn different things in order to be successful.
So as a carpenter, you learning these different skills. As you get better at each one, it's like, okay, now you're more so doing consistent concrete work or consistent drywall work, depending on how good you are and what you actually want to do.
Right. There's the phrase jack of all trades, master of none. And I feel like as a carpenter, you can't really be that way. Like you have to be a jack of all trades in the sense that in order to be employable, you have to be able to go do concrete and do it well. And you got to be able to go do drywall and do it well. Because if the union calls you up and they offer you a job, you go do it and you do it well, or you
Right,
don't
you
have a
better be
job.
good
Like,
at
oh
it.
well, I never did concrete before, and they're like, oh well, they're really looking for a good concrete guy. Sorry, we'll call somebody else. So being a carpenter, you have to be expansive. You have to understand a lot of different things, but you also have to hone in on that skill and be good at something in order to be more marketable and more employable, because it is a competitive industry. There's a lot of carpenters in the Detroit local, thousands, tens of thousands. There's a lot of people looking for work all the time. So in order to succeed, you got to know more than one thing, and you got to be good at more than one thing.
What's the transition from being an apprentice carpenter to a journeyman carpenter, and like what's the difference between the two?
So the apprentice, like I said, he's learning. He's running through learning the ropes. That's really when you take that time and you learn as many things as you possibly can, because an apprentice gets paid less, so it'll be okay if they hire an apprentice that doesn't really know concrete, but they just need a hard worker, and then you learn things as you go. A journeyman has to know his stuff. You're topped out, is what they call it, because you're making the top dollar. So you better know what you're doing. Otherwise, you're out of there.
Right.
You can't be a journeyman carpenter and not know a thing about concrete and last on a concrete crew, because things don't go that way. You have to know what you're doing in order to be successful on a project. So the difference between the two: apprentice is learning. He's going through the ropes. He's trying to make a name for himself and learn as much as he possibly can within that time. And then the journeyman has to already know it. They get paid the top dollar, so they have to already know what they're doing for the company that they're working with. You can't call up a drywall company and be like, oh yeah, I'm journeyman carpenter and drywall, I'll come do this, and not know drywall, because they'll figure it out in the first week,
Right.
and then you probably won't be there the week after that. It's a competitive industry. We're all there to make money fast, so you got to know what you're doing. When you do that, and that's the biggest thing. Is a journeyman is they got to be experienced. You know.
So does the journeyman come with more schooling, or is it a set amount of years, or does your company or union determine that?
It is a set amount of years. So the apprenticeship program is a 4-year program.
Okay.
After you complete those 4 years, no matter what it is that you've done during those 4 years, after you complete the 4-year program and you pass journeyman's test, then you excel into a journeyman. You know,
Now, You went from journeyman to foreman. What are the responsibilities of a foreman?
So the journeyman is your guy that goes out there and gets it done. You know, your foreman is the guy that has to make sure that all the journeymen out there know what they're doing, they do it well, and it gets done. The foreman is the boss of the crew, so he gets his orders from up top, and then he relays that to his crew of journeymen and apprentices, and then they all go do it. So sometimes you have a working foreman who will work alongside the journeyman, and sometimes the jobs are so huge you have a foreman that's just directing because there's so much going on. You may have 100 guys on a drywall outfit in one building, and the foreman's got to watch all 100 of those guys. So he don't have time to work. You know, he's over there making sure crew A is doing what they're doing and they're doing it right. He's over there with crew C making sure they're doing what they're doing and they're doing it right. And that's why I go back to saying, as a journeyman, you got to be most experienced because the foreman trusts their journeyman. They trust them to get it done right. You know,
So, like, what is it like managing a group of like groups like that? What makes a good journeyman? Excuse me, what makes a good foreman? What are the difference between a good foreman and a bad foreman?
communication is key, and you have to be personal. Times are different now than they were when I started as an apprentice, and at that time they were different when my dad started as an apprentice. You know, it is it's a world that not a lot of people can exist in. You get screamed at, you get yelled at, you get put down, and that doesn't mean that like you just go and quit. That's what kind of stands us apart from other people is because you take those things and you just throw them over your shoulder with those 2x4s and you keep pushing through the day. So a bad foreman doesn't get through to his guys because he's always just screaming at them. Nobody wants to. If you're getting screamed at all day, you don't want to perform for this dude. You know, but if you're with a guy that's a great dude, he's always telling you you're doing well or whatever. You want to excel for that guy. You want to be the best that you can be for his and the company's sake. So I guess the way that you get treated by the foreman that's what determines it. That and there's uh, it's a political business. So a foreman can be a foreman and not really deserve that position. Also, you'll run into that. And that foreman's obviously, if he's not qualified, but he's just somebody's brother, then that's a
Right.
bad foreman. It's just like, oh, whatever. You already know that you know better than that guy. So,
So, what is the roles of an assistant superintendent?
so an assistant superintendent helps out the project superintendent. The project superintendent is the one who runs the entire job. He runs all the foremen for all the different companies. So an assistant superintendent is helping out with anything that, has to be done. Typically, you don't have an assistant superintendent on the job unless the job is so large that there's so many things to manage. The project superintendent can't do it all himself. So the assistant superintendent is with him directing work, making sure that certain paperwork is done, and just helping out running the field because that's what a superintendent does is run the field.
So, is the superintendent akin to like the general contractor in a way?
Yes, but you can be a superintendent for a regular contracting company. Um, One role of a superintendent is also managing manpower, and it really depends on what type of superintendent you are. You can be a superintendent for a carpenter company that his sole role is to manage where all his guys go every day. That superintendent is different than a project superintendent because the project superintendent runs the whole project out of everybody, if that makes sense.
So, what would you say are the biggest differences between being in a going from foreman to assistant superintendent mentally and physically?
Um, as a foreman, you have the responsibility to make sure your guys are doing what they're supposed to, and then you still take a direction from the project superintendent or the assistant superintendent. You're still taking the directions of what has to be done that day from somebody else, and then you're relaying it to your crew and making it happen that way. An assistant and a project superintendent have to collaborate because they have to know what has to happen first. Like, we're not just going to start painting this wall if the wall is not done yet. You know what I mean? So the superintendent has to understand how the job goes, has to understand how the job goes for everybody, not just one company, but all of them. Because you can't finish that, you can't drywall that wall if the plumbing's not in there. Make sure that the plumbers go in first, and to make sure that the framers go around the plumbers, and to make sure that the insulation is in before you put the drywall in so that the painters can come. Like, you have to know everybody's role and the order that they do it in to be a project superintendent. That's the difference. For a foreman, that's just being good at your, specific task. You're a plumber foreman, you're a carpenter foreman, an electrical foreman, and those guys run their crews. While the superintendent runs all them guys, the foreman, the crews, the foreman's bosses. Like, he's got to make it happen on site. So that's the biggest difference is the project superintendent controls the whole job and the way that it goes down.
How important do you feel like having that journeyman and carpenter experience, like and going in that order, has helped?
It definitely helps a lot because I've been exposed to all types of work, indoor, outdoor, and I've seen the way that things go. Such as, like, I just kind of broke it down: plumbing, and then framing, and then you do electrical after that. Like, I've seen that happen. A lot of people haven't seen that happen. They just go in and they get a job because of a college degree. That I feel like that's the difference between field experience and college experiences. In the field, you see what works and what doesn't. You see how things go together already. So now, stepping into the assistant role to become a project superintendent, I'm already aware of the order of how things go. I'm not coming in there and being um, completely knowledgeable about other things. That's not to say I know everything. You got to learn something every day, but it helps with field experience overall because you've seen it happen. That's the long and short of that one.
What advice would you give somebody who wants to move up further in the construction industry?
That's all about networking and also being good at what you do. When you're good at what you do, it will reflect, and you'll almost be chosen. You know, People are like, "Oh yeah, that guy. I want him to be the top. I want him to be my foreman. I want him to be the next superintendent because he knows what's going on. Like, you know your stuff. You get good at it, and definitely have the desire to want to do those things because if you just treat it like a job, your jobs aren't going to go well. You have to have the care of how everything goes down. You know,
What do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions about the construction industry and the construction world?
I think that people don't understand what goes on out there, and that entails, like, mentally on the daily or the conditions on the daily. And people also don't understand the division of what certain trades do. Like, some people think that electricians only hook up lights and hook up ceiling fans. That's not the case. And people think that a carpenter is only somebody that does, maybe finish work, cabinets, countertops, that sort of thing. That's not the case. I mean, you got carpenters that are out there in the mud and snow and all that and still making it happen every day. And a lot of people can't do that. A lot of people can't hang in -4 degrees for 10 hours and getting screamed at and working
Right.
hard. That's not something that everybody does. You know, I think it's a misconception of what actually happens out there because I feel like don't, some people I feel like don't respect construction workers. You get around a lot of suit and ties and they don't even want to be in the same room as you. You're dirty. Like, yeah, okay, that may be the case, but that doesn't mean that I'm working hard and I've had an awful day and I'm still making this happen to build your office,
Right.
you know.
What are some of the other um, titles and outside of the foremans and the carpenters that you have to interact with, like the general contractors? Like, give a whole list of the operation going on to somebody who has nothing about construction. Like, you have the buyer and things of that nature. Speak on that a little bit.
Um, well, that's an expansive list, but generally the owner buys a project and then a general contractor has to hire other specialty contractors to make it done. So what that means is your general contractor is the one that kind of knows all the ins and outs of everything in construction, right? They know the order. So then they hire a really good carpenter contractor to get the carpentry portion done, really good plumbing contractor to get the plumbing portion done, and it kind of divides that way. So you got your owner, your general contractors, and then your specialty contractors. And within those specialty contractors, then you got your foreman, your journeyman, your apprentices that all make up the crew that gets it done. And those are like the main three, but within those roles, there's a lot of different things to make a company successful. You got to have an engineer who understands how to do the spreadsheets and the calculations and speaking with the architects too, because a lot of the times the architect is a separate entity. You have to talk to the architect in order to make something happen. You can't just make that decision by yourself. That's why an architect is an architect, you know, and architects do designs. They do designs and they approve what's going to work, when you're talking about large commercial buildings. You can't just place this light gauge Home Depot metal stud on this building that's supposed to withstand 100 years. The architect knows the specifications of what has to be in place. So there's a lot that goes into construction. There's a lot of different roles. There's architects, project managers, engineers, superintendents, foremen, you know, the crew.
Now, who would you say are some of the most difficult titles to work with?
Um, that really just depends on personality. You could have a great architect on one job that makes your job go smooth, and a bad architect on another job because, they might be stringent or knowledgeable or whatever the case may be. That's really a person type thing versus a role type thing. You know what I mean? Anybody can excel at being a superintendent, but also have knowledge from being an engineer previously or a project manager previously that helps them be better at what their role is because they've got a touch in other pieces of construction. So that's a person thing. That's not a role thing.
Now, what about the relation between like construction and safety?
Well, the job that we do is very dangerous. Dangerous every day. You're using saws, you're swinging heavy machinery, you're lifting extremely heavy material by yourself. Safety covers all of those aspects. And not everybody does what we do, but we have to do what we do in order to make buildings happen and make relationships, long lasting and happen. And you got to go home after that. So safety is directly tied in because some people don't know, you know, how to do certain things and not get hurt about it. They just, yeah, they're eager and they want to go do it, but there may be a method, and that goes beyond all things. Obviously, somebody has to be trained in driving a backhoe or an excavator in order to run that piece of machinery, and safety directly ties into that. Well, did he receive the proper training, and who trained him? You know, it, it ties in one and one.
Now, what about like the safety managers, like in working with safety managers?
A safety manager can be your best friend and your worst friend. You know, there could be a safety manager who just likes to throw his power around and stop everything for the littlest thing. Or you may think that it's the littlest thing because certain things may hold up work that could be dismissible, but that's That's another, like, you get a safety guy talking about this, and then you get a superintendent talking about this. That's a totally different conversation that happens, you know. But you have to take safety into consideration in order to have a successful project. You can't just disregard safety and then have success. Something bad is going to happen if you disregard safety. So you have to rely on your safety manager to give you the appropriate knowledge in order to um, do that project well. That's a better way to put it.
So what does a typical day look like for you as an assistant superintendent?
You go in, you talk to the guys, you make the plan for the day, and then you break off after that, giving everybody their directions. You make sure that everybody's got their certain paperwork in and um, things submitted to the architect for design changes, you know. And as an assistant superintendent, it's kind of vast. You can be, pardon me, you can be so focused on working in the field that you can't get back and then do the paperwork portion until later in the day. Or the paperwork portion is so vast you can't really talk to the people in the field. You know, an assistant superintendent kind of bounces around in what they're doing because they got to help out the project superintendent.
What is the most dangerous thing you've seen in the construction world?
That's a long list too. Um, Dangerous is when you go on site and there's no safety in place, you know, and you can see that right out. You can see guys standing on the edge of the scaffold with no guardrails and something like that, way high up, or you can see electricians standing in a puddle working on a transformer. You know, just you see that stuff all the time. Um, we are trying our best as an industry to make safety understood and it like grasped by everybody because a lot of people disregard safety. A lot of people disregard safety to get it done, and you can't do that because somebody's going to get hurt.
It's such a dangerous world.
It is a dangerous
Probably one of
world.
the most dangerous worlds.
Absolutely. You got saws, you got electrical hazards, you got machinery hazards, you got falling off a building, you got, the
Struck by
list is
accidents.
endless. Yeah, exactly. You just have to be mindful of what you're doing to try to accomplish the task safely and then go home at the end of the day. That's all.
What technological differences have you seen in the construction world? Like, how has technology played a role, like as far as equipment and stuff, since you started doing construction? What things have you seen?
Um, I've seen a lot of different things, and just now we actually got into it's like a model. You go onto the computer and you can actually see the building that you're building in a 3D platform. So like if I wanted to zoom in on the building, it shows the ins and outs of the plumbing and electrical and where everything's going to be placed. That that's not a thing that used to, be available 10 years ago. We're still working off of drawings and blueprints and things like that. Now those can be online and accessible from your phone. Even you can take a quick reference to the drawings while you're out there in the field. You used to never be able to do that before. You'd have to actually have the physical piece of paper and reference that. So technology's really speedballed a lot of it. Speedballed it in referencing those drawings, in being able to communicate with other trades within an instant. You know, um, and I think one of the coolest things is, like I was explaining that model, being able to drive and look into the underground and see where the underground piping is that feeds
Mm.
everything.
Oh yeah, that's very important.
Yeah, very important to understand how those things go on. So it's a good reference.
Especially to be able to access that from your phone and to be in the middle of work and you might be drilling into something and you can just take a quick reference or something like that.
Right. Because everything in construction has to be to the T. Everything. The concrete has to be to a T so that you can do everything else successfully after that. Then, the drywall, the electrical, the plumbing, it all has to be right. It all has to be in the right spot. Because if a plumber just throws his pipe in the middle of the room and didn't think about the fact that the HVAC ducts had to travel exactly that way so that they turn, to the cold air, you got a problem. So everything has to be coordinated by drawings, and being able to reference that on your phone or your iPad or your computer is highly valuable in today's world. You know, being able to understand things like that.
What do you think is the one of the most rewarding parts about working in construction?
Never doing the same thing one or twice, you know, and always reflecting on what it is that you have done. Like, I got an offer to do the seats in the Little Caesars Arena. And at that time, I had a very important position with the company and I couldn't let it go. So I passed it up. But I think about that all the time on how amazing it would have been to work on the Little Caesars Arena, you know, in Detroit. And I have friends who have. And that's a great thing to say. Like, yeah, I made that place happen.
Right.
You know, that's the best part about it, saying I made that happen or I did this. You know, you've been down to the basement and seen the things that I've done down there, and you know that's
Yeah.
how certain things happen, music videos and things like that, because you were like, oh yeah, you did this,
No,
you
facts.
know,
Facts. Yeah,
like
your
yeah,
basement
I did that.
is crazy. It's dope. Um, I just forgot my last question I was gonna ask you. No, I was gonna say, yeah, as far as construction goes, I feel like that is one of the most like just looking at it is probably one of the most rewarding jobs because there's so many jobs that you do that you feel like, why the fuck am I doing this?
Right.
But construction is one of them jobs that you can't feel like that. Like same thing with working in a plant. Like you're building the cars people drive. You're creating the homes and the buildings that people are living in. And like after you finishing those projects and being able to see a project start from absolutely nothing to, you know, building something that's just beautiful and amazing, I feel like it's very rewarding. Like you're literally building the world.
Yes, very rewarding. In that sense, building Detroit, you know, building Michigan, that's where it's at. It feels good, you know, because those places are going to be there long after we're gone. You know, it's building legacies and building relationships too, because it's not just about building buildings. It's about building what happens after that. You know, is that building that we just built going to be the largest sports center in Detroit? You know, that type of thing.
What is something that happened early on, like that was one of your biggest lessons, like as far as being in the construction? Like, what's a lesson that stuck with you for a long time, or maybe a mistake that you made that you learned from?
There's there's things to be learned every day, and I think that that principle might be the most important thing that I've learned is you have to be able to learn something every day. Certain guys out there that have been doing it for 20 years think that they're the best in the world because they've been doing it for 20 years. And that may not necessarily be that there's not a new way to do something or a faster way to do something. You know, your way is not the highway. And I think that understanding that concept is very important to be successful, because if you have that ego about you, then who wants to teach you? Or like how can you even be taught? You know, you really have to understand that there's something to learn every day. And that kind of goes with life too, not just construction. But I think for me that, because I didn't understand that for a while. You know, you have a bad day and view it as an awful day and a day that wasn't a success, or, you know, time lost. We didn't get the job done right, or not job done right, but we didn't get the job done in the time that we had to do it. You know, it's like, okay, but what did you learn throughout that day that made you more successful for the next time? That's very important to actually understand and grasp, you know, in construction.
Where do you see construction going, like in the future? Like, how do you see, like, what is the involvement of construction?
That kind of scares me, man. You know, they talk about AI stealing people's jobs, and for a really long time, I felt that our job, the construction industry, could not be replaced by AI, and it's creeping in. It's creeping in at a dangerous level. You know, there's a position called an estimator, and an estimator bids out the job so that you can make money. You know, There's AI programs that estimate for you now. So all that college that you did to crunch numbers and to understand all the crunching and how it happens and this and that, in order for your company to be successful, well, a computer can do that. So that's kind of, it is scary. It's scary, and I'm not comfortable with it because I've always felt that construction was untouchable by that level of technology, and I'm not so certain anymore.
I feel like that's a lot for everybody in almost every industry. Like I've sat back and thought about it like even with music is getting kind of dangerous. Like I just seen this music video, this AI singer, and it wasn't the best song in the world. But it's like they're getting close. Like they're getting closer and closer. Like some of the only some of the only jobs that I feel like won't truly get eaten up that I can see right off the top of my head is probably the hair industry. Like because hair is so much more than just getting like I can see people sitting under a machine and getting their hair cut, but the hair shop experience is much more than that. It's a lot more personal experience. And like maybe social media and influencing, but that can get eaten up as well with AI influencers and stuff of that nature. But them are like some of the few industries that I see like really not getting ate up by AI.
Yeah, that's a good point. And the I feel like renovation work can't be touched by AI because in order to do a renovation, you have to understand certain things and be able to still complete a project and do it well because certain things aren't provided for you. Renovation is different than new build. New build I feel like can now be orchestrated by some AI. You could make a square box with a design, and then you could have some computers program an excavator and a crane to place whatever you're doing there. But to renovate, to go into a situation where you see that things are a little bit out of the ordinary and still make it work because you understand the trade, that might be a little bit harder to do, which is why I've always felt that construction would be untouchable by AI. But it's not to say that they just throw renovation out the window and come time they'll be like, who wants to redo this when we can just blow it down and make another one?
Right.
You know, that's a tough one.
What are some of the most important certifications like for somebody getting into construction or programs or trainings that you think that people should take?
Take every training you possibly can, every training on every matter. As a like I said before, a project superintendent has to understand the whole thing. They got to understand how electricians do what they do, how painters or not painters, but how plumbers do what they do. You know, um, so
Painters,
training that
painters
helps
too.
you, yeah, trainers that help you understand those things. Take it all at any time, and that's why an apprenticeship program is important because that's a multiple year training on that trade. That's why that's still a valuable thing in these times. It's because nobody just knows how to be a carpenter. That's not something that you can just do. You have to learn it and be taught it even. So training to be the the fastest drywaller with the quickest methods and things like that matter.
Now, the last question. What advice would you give somebody who wants to get into the construction field and do you think that they should coincide that with college as well?
That depends on what you want to do in college. Um, Being a project superintendent, I think the field is where it's at. You have to understand what's going on and how it happens, and then in the order it happens. So to do that, you're not going to understand that by going to college. It's just, you, it's not the same, as going out there and experiencing it for yourself, doing it for yourself. That right out, somebody wants to be a tradesperson, working hard, go to an apprenticeship. You're never going to learn more than getting into an apprenticeship and being taught the right way. You know, a union apprenticeship, getting taught the right way to succeed and produce. Because that's the other thing. Is productivity is one of the top levels of importance of construction. How fast we get it done. We want to do it well, but we want to do it fast too. You
Absolutely.
know, and people who can do it well and do it fast, generally are trained by the union and the union apprenticeships. You know, so if you want to learn how to do something, pick a trade. You want to be an electrician, you want to be a plumber, you want to be a carpenter, go do that apprenticeship, and then after that, just work your way up. I think that that's the best way to possibly do it. You know, is starting from the bottom and going up. Um, you know, you want to be an engineer, an architect, maybe college is the way to go on that. But speaking on getting your hands dirty and understanding how things get built, you know, get in that apprenticeship.
Man, Santino, I really appreciate you for coming on, man. You just gave the world a whole bunch of game in the music industry, on music and the construction world, bro. So I really appreciate you being on.
Yeah, no problem, man. Thank you for having me.
No problem, man. This is the 10th episode of the God Pod. I really appreciate y'all for being here, man. Make sure y'all tap in on patreon.com. That is where we will be having all the exclusive content. I'm going to put the link up here somewhere. Another appreciation I like to give is to Dave and Jay. Dave, if you want to step over here, man, show yourself on the camera, say what up to the people. This the man behind the camera. Y'all don't get to see, but he is back there working it and making it happen, man. So we appreciate him too. But yes, sir, that is the end of the 10th episode. We're going to see y'all again on the 11th. Love.
Yeah, I really got this shit in the bag right now. Bad bitch in the front seat, car go fast right now. Smoke dope, but we low-key though. Had to give him the okey doke. Like I'm so straight, I'ma just pass right now. Nigga need that bread like Peter. Everything I do for a reason. If you break that code, it's treason. Every one of my dogs, I'm bleeding. Every one of my dogs, I need them. Locked down, free that pen, not breathing. I do this shit for a reason. I don't do this shit for no reason. What you wanna know, I won't lie.